So welcome, Bruce. Very happy to have you today.
Thank you. Happy to be here with you.
Yeah, this is the 11th conversation I'm having about co-creating the third attractor. And they are all very, very different. And there is only one common thing. I always start with one question. I start with the
Mhm.
question, do you know what is the third attractor? And can you say it in your own words, how you understand what we are actually discussing here, co-creating the third attractor?
Yeah, there's a couple ways you can frame it. One is it's an actual new mode of organization that is not collapse and it's not authoritarian control. The two things that seem to be at the at the edge of emergence right now or consolidating
Mm-hmm.
right now, but that it's a regenerative kind of future. So you could look at it as another civilizational destination, but you can also look at it more as a kind of orientation, one that aims towards responding creatively and integratively and harmoniously with emergent complexity that doesn't give in to the pull towards, trying to control or allow things to go so far that they fall into collapse. So it's more of an orientation that groups or individuals would hold. I think Jonathan Rowson might put it something more in those terms, where Schmachtenberger might talk about it more as maybe like an attractor basin, um, in a systems terms, not in attitudinal terms.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And for me, the big question that I still haven't kind of answered for myself is the third attractor something that is existing independently of us, or is it something that we can actually co-create? Because I call this series co-creating the third attractor, but I'm not totally sure that we have the power or the means to actually co-create the third attractor. What's your thoughts about that? Do you think we can and should,
I
or
do. I
is it
think
more like a kind of a thing that is already happening?
I think it's already happening in some sense, but I think it's happening through our agency and our responses. And of course, there are levels of it that are beyond anything that any individual is aware of, kind of the emergent consequences of multiple decisions and things like that. But the more that we can try to track what's happening, I think we can creatively dance with it. I would not think that we are able to take any top-down, approach to it that would be effective because it's too complex, the dynamics
Mhm.
that are at play, but that we can creatively move with what's emerging in ways that are midwifing or stewarding rather than fixing into place.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And where do you see the most important issues or projects or places where we should and can put our energy, our attention, our efforts to create something different, something new?
It's really challenging, and I don't know that any individual group can do it all. We have to work, across groups, I think. Some focusing on interior development, some focusing on systems change, and some focusing on cultural,
Mm-hmm.
components or behavioral changes. Um, in other words, a four-quadrant approach is needed. I don't know of any group that maybe can hold all of them with equal depth, but if we can create an ecosystem of people who are working on these things together, I think that is, ideal. Um, I could say a little bit, I'm part of the Blue Sky Leaders program, and
Mm-hmm.
just this past weekend, um, we focused on Dwayne Elgin's work. Um,
Yeah.
we actually focused on three components in interplay with each other that I think is relevant to our conversation today. So Dwayne Elgin talks about three pathways, and he's been doing this for 20, 30 years. And for him, they're very similar. He feels that we're at humanity's at a period of adolescent development. We're going through a profound initiation right now, and he
Hmm.
sees, three pathways ahead, one of which is towards collapse, one of which is towards authoritarian clampdown, or the third he calls
Hmm.
the Great Transition, where
Mm.
it's regenerative and there's an emergent voluntary simplicity, but also a renewed spiritual depth, things like that. So he's been talking about this for a long time, and so he presented on that in light of Schmachtenberger's framing and other framings, game B, integral. So we explored that, and we also met with uh, Francis Weller. And Francis Weller does a lot of work on grief, working with grief, what he calls an
Hmm.
apprenticeship to sorrow, of moving into elderhood, and contacting the depths of wisdom and
Grief in a personal sense, or grieving the state of the world.
grieving the state of the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So he works with people at multiple levels, but the deepest thing that he's looking at is, and this is something that we've been talking about in other contexts from Joanna Macy and other people. A lot of people who are working to bring collective change in the world, they almost, get into a heroic stance and have to take on this massive thing. And they in that drive to meet the challenges, they cut off the walls of feeling in order to be able to just respond more
Yeah,
expediently to what's ahead of them. So you
yeah.
find that very commonly in activist kind of circles or groups that are focused on radical systemic change. And for Joanna Macy, that one day she broke down and realized she was not able to hold, she was not allowing herself to hold her feeling for the state of the world in a way that was actually making her fragile and undermining her effectiveness. And she saw it all around her. So she started years
Mm.
ago what she called grief work, which is to create ritual containers where we can let ourselves feel deeply what's what's really going on and what is our human response to what's going on. And so with Francis Weller, he does this in his own unique way, a very beautiful, poetic way. What he talks about a soul approach to leadership and to wisdom, where you really get into resonant contact with the depth of feeling in a way that isn't thrown off by it, but instead is actually clarified by allowing that feedback from the larger system to come through us, right? And so we
Yeah,
focused
yeah.
a lot on what is leadership in the time of the meta crisis with these three pathways ahead of us. If we can't actually ritually, individually, collectively make the space to hold the feeling of what's in front of us. Um, and then in the next day, we follow this up with more contemplatively focused, non-dual kind of stuff, where we're looking at um, the basic ground of goodness and
Yeah.
how through different
Mm-hmm.
practices you can feel into that ground of goodness, even in the midst of very trying situations. And so overall in that container, what we were trying to do is look at the pathways ahead of us. How do we deeply feel it with grief work, but also not lose sight of our fundamental non-dual participation in being and becoming, where you can
Yeah,
feel
yeah.
that ground of goodness that can come through our sensory pathways and our mental, gates, to recognize that this is the horizon in which we're always moving. And so trying to hold that as a constellation for
Yeah.
for stewarding leadership.
Very interesting. And wouldn't you agree that actually a truly non-dual embrace would include the grieving part, or
Mm,
like the facing everything, avoiding nothing in our language? Like
yes.
for me, more and more, it gets so clear that non-dual actually means to hold it all.
Yes.
The underlying goodness and the messiness of the manifest world. And because if it's non-dual, it's non-dual, and then we have to embrace it all. We have to feel it all. We have to see it all with very open eyes.
Yes. Yeah. Joanna Macy puts it in a powerful way, which is the only heart that's big enough to hold the world is the heart that's been broken open.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. It also reminds me of how Mark Gaffney has put it into these terms of pre-tragic, tragic, and post-tragic,
Mm,
saying that we have to go through these phases and actually feel the tragic,
mm.
really see what is happening in the world before we can move post-tragic and then actually participate in creating different solutions.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's hard to really let it all in, isn't it? I
Hmm.
mean, I I can see it in myself. It's like I'm very informed about everything that is happening in the world, and at the same time, I also feel like, and we have our little paradise here, and
Yes.
so what is the right way to engage with the world, and what is our role in it to actually change something? This finding out where each and everyone's potential is to actually change something is one of the big questions, I think.
Yeah, that's something that it's been a bit of a learning journey for our first cohort in this Blue Sky program.
Mm,
We started out with the focus on, the meta crisis and what does it mean to hold higher values and seek wisdom in the midst of what Roger Walsh calls the civilization at risk, and
yeah.
so that's kind of the framing that we started the whole journey with. And we've been touching into different elements of the meta crisis and the poly crisis, different ways to frame it throughout the
Hmm.
program. But there's also been, I'll acknowledge from my side a bit of reticence to really fully open up in the middle of the classroom or whatever, what's happening politically or what's happening in other places
Yeah.
because it could become overwhelming. Um,
Yeah.
but so we've taken this journey where we've been cultivating different aspects of ourselves and looking at the big picture and trying to think about what is leadership in the front of all of this. Um, so when we finally got to this module where we looked at the grief and went, fairly deep into that, there was actually a real notable um, sigh of relief from a lot of the participants that, okay,
Mm,
we've we've been feeling this, but we've also been kind of there was a felt need to actually let it in, right? And we
yeah.
hadn't
Yeah. Yeah.
fully let it in yet. And so this was like the opening of that, and I think it was important.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's very important, and it's interesting. I started to have dialogue sessions now in Manifest Nirvana about my conversations about the third attractor. So every
Mm,
second Sunday, we take one of the conversations, and people can come on Zoom, and we have a conversation about the conversation, if
mm,
that makes sense.
nice,
Yeah,
nice, yeah.
and that's very interesting because you can see how overwhelmed people actually are, and there is a tendency in human beings to make it smaller and more personal as than it actually is,
Hmm.
and that's very interesting. So and therefore what we try to do is really opening up to let it all in, also this many different views, what would need to happen, how it should look like, what we should do, but actually let it in the situations but also the solutions, and then not be crushed by the idea that, oh, but I cannot do this all, or it's too much for me, but then
Right.
actually come back to ourselves and find out what it means, but not to do that too early, because when you too early go into your personal, then you make it smaller than it is, and you say, yeah, I just try to be nice with my husband and my dog and my cat, and that's what I can do, which
Yeah,
is beautiful, obviously, and a good
yeah.
idea to do. But when you make it too big, it's so overwhelming that it blocks you out. So,
Yes. Yeah, it could be overwhelming and just, yeah, make you
yeah,
paralyzed, right? And
totally.
yeah.
Yeah.
You're familiar with the Tonglen practice?
No, I'm
Tonglen.
not.
Tonglen is, is a Tibetan practice of breathing in the suffering and then breathing
Mm,
out healing. So
yeah, yeah.
when you, yeah, in the usual Tibetan practice of Tonglen, you would, imagine the suffering of other people and breathe it in as a thick black smoke and take it into your heart, and then breathe
Mm-hmm.
out, awakened mind and healing to the other people.
Mm-hmm.
But you take it away from the others and into yourself,
Yeah.
and then you breathe out the other. And it's a beautiful practice. It's a profound one. The reason I was mentioning it is because of what you were talking about. When you're doing Tonglen for the world, it's
Mm-hmm.
really overwhelming, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
think about the layers of suffering and injustice and other things that are going on at multiple scales, trying to do Tonglen on behalf of the world could be overwhelming. And one way that Joanna Macy has reframed it is to thinking about it as not I breathe in the suffering, um, as the lone bodhisattva hero, but that we as Sangha breathe it in, and we are not individually responsible for the
Mm-hmm.
healing of the other, but that we
Mm-hmm.
can trust that allowing it to move through us into the larger field
Mm-hmm.
will be naturally clarifying. And so it's kind of removing the burden away from any individual having to feel that they're holding the responsibility for the whole, even though on one level you want to do that paradoxically, but on another you don't want it to let it paralyze you. And so
Yeah, yeah.
recognition that it's actually collectively what we're doing, and that there's parts of the field that are much beyond us, that through which the healing can happen if we allow ourselves to be the conduit, for because if we don't allow that smoke to come in, we're not allowing feedback from the system to come in, for us to be really intelligently aware of what's happening, right?
Yeah.
That to feel that suffering, to feel that anguish, to feel the need, is to let the system, to let being more fully know itself, and then be able to be better resourced to respond to it. Um, so yeah, there's just, yeah, more of a focus in these kinds of efforts to do it collectively rather than individually.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think it's it's very interesting for myself, and I hear you talk the same way. It's a little bit easier to think about the left quadrants in terms of what needs to happen. Like
Mhm.
we want to grow, we want to develop ourselves, we want to wake up, hopefully. That would be great, and then come together in awakened mind or higher mind, and meet in oneness, and then we can do this kind of practices and hold it all together as a we, as a or from that oneness that we can experience when we actually wake up. Where I find it much more difficult to have real hope is in the right quadrants, or in the lower right especially. And I was talking yesterday with Rob Smith about this, because he is very focused with his organization on creating new structures, creating new protocols.
Mhm.
But what's your take on the lower right? Because how can structures and systems and governments and organizations be changed? What does it need there for real change to happen?
It's a really challenging one, question, of course. And I was involved with Rob in some of the early days of that. I am,
Yeah,
and um, there are, we know that some of the biggest levers for systemic change is paradigm change. So that is, when you think about what's a paradigm, both it's an upper left or lower, it's the left hand belief and framing and perspective, but it's also a paradigm always involves injunctions and ways to do things. So it's also new ways to organize, new tools, new things like that. So we do need efforts that are you know help new paradigms to emerge that can catalyze what Daniel Quinn calls the river of vision. When people are called by vision, you don't need a
Hmm.
lot of organization, and people are going to spontaneously come up with ways to enact it when they have that vision pulling them. So I think that's an important piece to keep in mind, even as you're thinking about systemic change. Um, if Daniel Quinn talks about if you only are thinking about systemic change and you haven't really embodied that paradigmatic vision and it, in a way that it can actually enliven your sensitivity and your perception, um, then it's just like sticking sticks in a river, and the river's just going to find a way to flow around your little intervention points, and it's going to keep going
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because culturally, what's still carrying people forward is a different river of vision, which is what the one that's creating the problems, right? So you need to be able to tap into, I think that left-hand piece is essential. Um, and then I feel the organizational pieces can happen around that, but it's not only one way, because as new forms emerge, it influences our consciousness, and so there's a tetra rising and a mutual paths of influence. One thing I was thinking about, I don't know if it's helpful to frame it in these terms or not. A couple different pieces here that are related. Uh, One, well, first I want to say about the third attractor piece, the three attractors, collapse and, authoritarian control or a regenerative future. And when you look at what's likely to be emerging, at least in a light popular way, a cultural way, we could say that there's a fourth attractor that's actually manifesting. Um, but it may not be accurate to really call it that. It's probably a variation of the third attractor, but I would call it a strangeness attractor, um,
Mm,
which is what's about to be unleashed in the world within the next decade, 2 decades for sure, with AI,
mm,
with synthetic biology, um, where we're going with neurotech and nanotech. Um, we are going to be able to rewrite life code to use DNA for storing information for computer purposes, working at the quantum level, processing that's beyond our imagination right now, AI moving into territories that are beyond, neurotech interfacing our subjectivity with machine intelligence in ways that will have unpredictable effects. We're about to enter a territory that may not be collapse and it may not be authoritarian control, but it's going to be so radically challenging to what we have held about the nature of physical being, because we can
hmm hmm
rewrite big parts of it, and of what it means to be a subject when we're interfacing with, distributed intelligence or other kinds of things are happening. We're about to enter you know, if you read like The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman, looking at, how these technologies, because synthetic biology and AI are informing each other, and, you can have a gene editing done in your garage right now. I mean, we're
Yeah.
about to enter really different territory, and it's going to be, I think, in the mid and, short and midterm at least, highly strange territory where boundaries are really blurred from what was our stable sense of self and world and matter and all of those things. So on the one hand, yeah, there may not be a collapse, there may not be authoritarian control. There might be, a kind of a descent into a kind of cultural or civilizational madness as we're facing the unraveling of all kinds of familiar touchstones about reality. Um,
Hmm.
and so the, there's a sense that, whatever we're doing, we have to learn to shamanically interface with and dance with the strange that's going to be
Hmm.
coming forward. And um, I think more technically, this is really a variation. If it's not going towards collapse and not going towards authoritarian control, um, instead of just regeneration, it's also containment, in that we're going to have to figure out um, how to walk the line between, kind of constant generative engagement with reality that's always producing the novel, and
Yeah,
yet containing the effects of that so that it doesn't lead to collapse, but not
yeah.
containing it so much that it actually ends up shutting down the process, right? But I think some of the ways that the third attractor has been framed, it's like kind of going back to simple living and a more natural life and a spiritually rooted life. And all of those things are beautiful and good. But what might be happening is whatever we're doing is going to be in a really strange new setting that humanity hasn't really inhabited much, and we aren't quite ready for. And therefore, what are the skills needed to be able to do that dance of containment and yet allowing for the creative play that with AI help is going to be ever escalating. And so that's a real challenge that I don't think we're really thinking through very well. And so the reason I wanted to give
Hmm.
that as a preface is I sometimes talk about this idea of a generative enclosure. Um,
Hmm.
and, that you can think about it in multiple ways, but a generative enclosure is, it sets up a boundary in which a certain kind of disclosure can happen. It's only by setting the boundary that then it allows something of reality to be emerged. If you have no boundaries, you don't perceive anything. It's just, it's drawing that boundary that actually allows for disclosure. Um, and are you doing it in a way that is generative and evolutionary and it allows for new emergence to happen, and authentic disclosure that's a contact with reality? Or are you setting up boundaries that are actually cultic and closed and
Yeah,
ideological
yeah.
and that lock you in, a fixed vision? So that's a generative enclosure. And there's a degenerative enclosure is one where the boundaries are too thick and it becomes too inward focused and it becomes authoritarian.
Yeah,
So that's the move towards control is the degenerative enclosure. The move towards collapse would be disenclosure, where you've got the enclosure, but you can't keep it stable enough. And what held through practices, stories, routines, technologies, systems, those hold an enclosure in place. And if those become unmoored from each other, you move towards collapse, and then that's disenclosure, right?
yeah,
So for me, one of the things I've been thinking about recently, I look at different meta theories, and I know you talked to Rob recently, and with Rob, we've been looking at Boscar's meta reality or Edgar
yeah,
Morin's complex reality, and of course Ken Wilber's integral theory. And one that I sometimes look at these days is also Latour's philosophy of becoming around the modes of existence. And he says that, there are many, many different modes of becoming. Each has its own mode of veridiction, its own mode of speaking truth. And so there's a legal mode, there's a religious mode, there's an organizational mode, there's a political mode, there's multiple modes. Each one has its own form of alethic disclosure of reality that works within its own trajectory of becoming. And
mm,
for him, like religious truth is not one that necessarily corresponds to reality in a scientific way, Religious truth is the reality that transforms you when you receive it. That's the mark of the truth value and the power of that religious communication, whereas political allows different things. So there are multiple modes, and in an integral approach, you would what I like to call it modal choreography. You want to find generative ways for all of the modes to play together, none of them to overly dominate for and fix the discourse and fix the practice.
Would you translate the modes in integral language to the lines or to the stages or both?
They're kind of like lines. Yes, they're kind
Yeah,
of like lines of
exactly.
becoming.
Yeah,
Yeah. If you think about them, just like take lines and put them in a little bit different context, they're
yeah.
more like lines, and you've got to let them play together. And typically, you can do like a Latourian analysis of what's going on with um, control. And certain modes are dominating, and they're doing it in a fixed or dysfunctional way. Um, you know, like habit. Habit is one of the
Mm-hmm.
modes that
Mm-hmm.
Latour talks about. In control, habit becomes externally forced, and everybody has to keep to a narrow routine, and you can only do certain kind of things, right? And otherwise, you face consequences and very tight control. Whereas disenclosure or collapse, habit would come undone, and people um, no longer know how to respond intelligently or no longer have an inbuilt wisdom that carries them forward. And that's just a habit is one of the modes. So you can look at all of the modes like that and see how they're playing together. And for me, a third attractor approach um, is one that recognizes these different lines, these different modes, and tries to cultivate a space in which, um, one, they can all inform each other and play together, and
Mm-hmm.
two, um, there's also a kind of, you could even call a systematic um, choreography with them, where you experiment with, for instance, like you have a community, and there's kind of the political mode has certain ways of doing things, and then there's another mode that would focus on more like technical things, and or another that would focus on religious communication or whatever. You let each one take over for a period of time and govern what happens for the community,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
and see what actually can be actualized within the community when you allow this mode to play out for a while.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but you don't let it play out so long that it actually becomes only a political institution or only a religious one or whatever, right? So there's this kind of modal choreography that you could do that then allows the system to be constantly self-regenerating and flexible, and it can allow these intelligences to inform each other, right?
and also it also establishes, as I understand it, kind of a natural hierarchy that when it's about political decisions, it's the people that have the highest development in these political modes that would be allowed to take over and make the decisions, whereas when it comes to spiritual matters, it's probably different people, and when it comes to economic matters, it's different people. And
Right.
that's how I would describe a natural hierarchy, that when everybody is so attentive to where the highest wisdom comes from in each of the lines or in each of the questions that are in the room, then you get a very natural way of listening to where is the highest wisdom coming from.
Exactly right. Yes. And so, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
like a holacracy kind of model where you allow shifting centers of leadership or control to emerge. It's kind of a holacracy of modes, right? Which would
yeah,
involve
yeah.
individuals. Yeah.
The only thing that I would say, or I wonder if you agree, I feel like therefore awakening or going beyond ego is so important, because as long as we are stuck in our small selves, it's much more difficult to listen to this emergent hierarchies But when
Yes.
you are beyond ego, beyond small self, and can actually be open to the reality as it appears, then you are open to this kind of movements in the best possible way.
I think
And
so. I mean, I think it
yeah,
really, you can start to see, if we want to use that language, start to see, movement towards this with teal, but it really would take turquoise construct
yes,
awareness to hold this in a way that I think would be healthy and not get pulled down by ego dynamics and shadow and things like that. I don't think we ever get totally beyond shadow, but I think you have a better
no, no,
chance. Yeah, with it with
yeah,
the
yeah.
turquoise. Yeah.
No, no, I'm also not talking about perfection. I'm just talking about a general ability to kind of stay in your authentic or liberated self more often than not, and
Yes.
see and act from there. And I also wanted to ask you. It makes a lot of sense what you say about the lines, and I would say the same about the stages. A third attractor approach would need to find ways to integrate with all of the stages, because we
Mhm.
cannot expect everybody to kind of be catapulted up to integral. So whatever we come up with, it has to be able to communicate with all the stages, integrate all the stages, be yeah, just be part of the whole spiral in a way.
Mhm.
And that's something else where I feel like, wow, that's a big job in the midst of all the other big issues that we have. Be able to bring all the different worldviews together
Mm.
into one kind of, how did you call it, like you have to have a vision towards something, yeah.
Mhm.
And that's the big deal. How do you do that? How do you create this vision that actually could become, could get buy-in from all the stages? In one of my conversations with Nish Dubashia, uh, we were talking about quite a out there idea that actually with Satchidananda from the Indian culture,
Mhm.
that's an expression of what people naturally wish for, or would buy into as a vision or as a third attractor. And then we added, yes, Satchidananda, and the recognition that we are co-creators of of the world, of the universe. And with these four qualities of Satchidananda and co-creation, we kind of felt like, oh wow, that's quite a good third attractor
Mm.
if we could uh, light a fire for people with that. But it's yeah, it's a utopian vision that it's probably far out there.
Yeah, I was thinking about that word about 5 years ago. I don't know if you saw it on the Integral Stage. We did a series called Utopia, and
Mm-hmm.
it was spelled with EU.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Because often,
I remember. Yeah,
utopia really means kind of no place. It's an imaginary no place that can't really
yeah,
happen because it's too idealistic.
yeah.
But EU would be a good place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we were trying to, in that series, think through what is a utopic world to come and what are pathways towards that
Yeah.
that are grounded and responsive, that are, as I think you're saying with Satchitananda, that have a depth to them that,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't feel like just a surface buy-in of ideological values, but that really feels like it's deeply connecting to what's true and real
Yeah.
in reality. Um, and but that's grounded and not idealistic or ideological or utopic in that sense. So I was thinking about that this morning, thinking about talking to you, and um, I was thinking about a word, but it already exists. So it's not maybe a good word, but I was thinking of eutropia, because tropos
Okay.
means to be oriented towards or to be pulled towards,
Ah, yeah,
like
yeah,
you know. Uh, Stanislav Grof talks about the holotropic. There's the
yeah, yeah,
heliotropic,
yeah,
which is the plant turns towards the sun, and holotropic is the pull towards the wholeness, the movement towards wholeness, so holotropic movement. And so then I was thinking of eutropic movement, the movement
Yeah,
towards the good. Right? So eutropia, which is like to
yeah,
allow yourself to be pulled towards the good.
yeah,
And
yeah, and towards more goodness, truth, and beauty. I think that's kind of something that many people could buy in and say, yeah, it's just so challenging because not everybody has the same understanding of the good and probably
yes.
also of the true and the beautiful.
Mm,
I wanted to come back to something where I was very fascinated by what you were saying, like this fourth attractor, the strange attractor. And I was remembering that spiral dynamics makes this strong point that new value systems always arise from the life conditions.
hmm.
It's never that they are created because of this, that, or the other thing. It's the life conditions. And when you were talking about the influence of AI and what is happening everywhere, I was realizing, oh wow, yeah, probably that's just how it will start and how this new value system will arise or
Yes.
manifest itself.
That's something I feel and find in the kind of the tension that's there a little bit between metamodernism and integral.
Yeah,
Um, at least when you look at metamodernism as it originally emerged, which was, an academic response tracking things that are happening in popular culture.
yeah,
Um, they were sociologically, culturally, trying to identify new emergent ways of holding things that were growing out of the life conditions of our time. And so that's what they were naming metamodernism was this is not postmodernism anymore. This is not modernism. Something else is coming forward. And so there's a naming of something that's already at play versus integral, which in some ways has always been kind of a something that's born out of thinking through things and then wanting to put it forward as an ideal to attract people to that ideal. But it's not something, like the integral mindset was not something that, people were in the four quadrant way that it's been put. That wasn't necessarily showing up exactly culturally in a way that was
I
carrying
agree.
force.
Yeah.
And so um, I feel like there's been a little bit of something artificial on the side of the integral, even that's where I sit and live in wanting people to catch our vision rather
And
than
go there, come there. Or yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. But you know that it's very interesting that you bring this up because uh, Andrew and I talked a lot about this, and we had kind of this theory that the metamodernists are actually manifesting teal. For me,
Mhm.
metamodernism is nothing else than teal, and they
Yeah.
don't like it. They feel like they are a different thing than integral. But for me, it always was kind of, no, no. These guys actually have their center of gravity in teal, and they recognize it that it's not postmodernism, which is true. It goes in the same direction as what you just described, and they see, no, no, we are different. We have different values. But with an integral mind, you
You
look
can
at it
see
and
it.
say, yeah, you guys are teal,
Yeah.
beautiful, it's all
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And and then you see some of the old timer integrals where you feel, I hope I can say that here, where you feel there is still a lot of postmodernism in their center of gravity. There is
Mhm.
in the old timer boomer integral, I feel there is a lot of green that
Mhm.
defines how they think and act. And when they look at the metamodernists, they see something else. But I always feel like they are missing the point to say, yeah, these are the first integral guys that actually grew up into this teal stage and are naturally located there.
Very much so. I see the same thing. And and I would also say that, things that we would recognize as, resonant with or component to integral I think those things have been emerging culturally, but not constellating in a way that actually takes on a name for itself or emerges as a distinctive style. But a lot of the elements that are, like for instance, the emphasis on, Aurobindo's emphasis on becoming, or the
Yeah.
integral approach on an evolutionary spirituality. You can find that emerging well outside of integral aware communities. Um, so it's already coming up in the culture in its own
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
but it's not constellating in a way that metamodernism began
No,
to.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And you don't have to have read Wilbur to express integral values and be located in having a center of gravity there.
yeah.
And that's just very interesting. But for me, this is actually a reason to still be strongly connected to integral, because it's so helpful to see what is happening.
Hmm.
Also, I mean, the whole polarization and everything, to see it through an integral lens makes it a little bit easier to see what is happening.
Hmm.
It's still
Yeah, for sure.
difficult, but it makes it a little easier.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So do you see, I also wanted to follow up on what you said about these enclosed, how did you call it? Enclosures where you
Uh,
can prototype things?
Oh, generative enclosures. Yeah.
Generative enclosures. Do you see generative enclosures, or are they around? Are they existing? And how do they
Yes.
work?
Yeah. Actually, I mean, in one way, it's a very boring word in that, there's so many things that are generative enclosures. Your body is a generative enclosure, a cell is a generative enclosure, a government is a generative enclosure. But you know, basically anything that um, autopoetically draws a boundary and then is self-maintaining and self-transforming, that is a generative enclosure. But
Mm-hmm.
the way I started wanting to explore that was I wanted to think about, initially, the way I started exploring it was I wanted to think about how can I hold um, deep, if I like in a trans lineage religious practice, I deeply want to go into Advaita Vedanta, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also deeply want to look at Zen, or I also deeply want to go into Catholic mysticism or whatever. And can that be done in a way that doesn't get you caught up in kind of like, just the ideological, doctrinal tangles that kind of try to nullify and cancel everything out? Oh, you can't say that because you're a Catholic or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so, because I was inspired by people like Abhishektananda, or Henry Lassault, or Raimon Panikar, or Bede Griffiths, people who wanted to go very deep in their own tradition, but also go very deep in the Indian tradition or another tradition,
Mm-hmm.
and navigate those spaces in a way that they can really see what is the fruit of this path, um, and to hold the tensions that are there
Yeah.
between the different visions, right? And so I started thinking about that. And for me, generative enclosure was a way to think about, in any tradition, you have, sayings and practices and communities, and all of those things hold the conditions in place for a certain kind of an active disclosure of a vision of reality. And, within the context of Catholic practice, you can do these things, and you'll through that deep practice come to have certain experiences and actively, right? But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in your community, in an Advaita community, different conditions are there. It's a different generative enclosure that is basically a vehicle for enactment, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
so
And
think
inside you have to adhere to certain rules and yeah, rules,
exactly. But
so
if you
that it
can see
works.
those rules as part of the means of drawing the boundary that allows for
Yeah.
the disclosure,
Yeah,
right? They're
exactly.
not restrictive in the sense of like they're, like I know that, Rob talks about constraint, of possibility. There's all that infinite possibility, but you have to set certain constraints in place for,
Exactly.
yeah, to bring forward certain potentials, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I started thinking about, if we could relate to our religious paths as generative enclosures in that sense of conditions that set certain constraints on possibility space to allow for certain kinds of emergence, um, certain kinds of disclosure, um, and to be able to relate to them in that way, um, can, you know, it doesn't mean that it becomes easy, but to me, it was a conceptual way um, to have insight into how I could do both at once, recognizing kind of in that sense what's going on and why I can embrace this set of rules that contradict that set of rules, because they're in that service of creating that generative enclosure for the disclosure of a certain kind of contact with reality.
Yeah, yeah. I think what would be important to do that is that when you enter such a generative enclosure for however long, for that time, this is the environment you commit to,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
because otherwise it doesn't work.
Right. No, if you just keep bouncing around, you don't
No,
let anyone act on you.
yeah, exactly, because in these enclosures, it also gets difficult at times, and you
Hmm.
have to bear the difficulty as
Yes.
long as you are in there, and you have to go through that difficulty to get the full benefit. And I think that that's an element of spiritual growth that I find hard to replicate today, as the kind of these kind of gurus kind of seem to die out, or are not welcome anymore. That hold such a generative enclosure with a very strong hand, uh, and that means that the whole thing is a little bit watered down. Then you have all these experiments, but in the experiments, the postmodern self can always find ways to escape one way or the other.
Exactly. So that's one of the real reasons I wanted to look at that because there's, the whole problem in our postmodern context of spiritual dilettantism. And as soon as it
Yeah,
starts getting hard in this path, oh, I'll just hop over to this path for right now.
yeah,
And you never actually go deep. That's something that
yeah,
Thomas Merton critiqued a long time ago is you end up digging a lot of shallow wells and you never hit the water.
yeah.
Um, and so how can you have a robust translineage practice that, um, to me, to think about the generative enclosure is a way of conceptualizing what you're doing that allows for the maintenance of those kind of boundaries for those kinds of ends. Um, and, that can recognize when you start hopping around like that, you're actually creating a degenerative enclosure, which is
Yeah.
leaky. It doesn't allow for any pressure to build up for there to be emergence, those kinds of things.
So your vision is for a translineage way of doing it. But would you say the same is true also if you just stay with one lineage? We have to find new ways of creating the generative enclosures, even if it's in one specific lineage, no?
I think
You
so,
know what I
yes.
mean? Yeah,
Yeah.
because you mentioned the trans lineage. I understand that you feel like it would be interesting to have the experiences in different lineages, and I agree, but I don't think that everybody needs to have the
No, they
trans
don't.
lineage experience.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. But for even for single lineage work, you still have the same challenge. How do you go deep with a group of people?
Right. And to me, this is for me, there's still I would recognize for myself a significant learning journey ahead in terms of in the complexity of our times and, and the sensibilities of our times, what do we need for a robust generative enclosure that can, that even if it's operating within one lineage, can nevertheless interface with the conditions in the world as they are. which is the three pathways or the three attractors and maybe the attractor towards strangeness. There's all this stuff going on. Um, how do you create, even within one tradition, an enclosure that is
Hmm.
closed enough that it allows for the buildup of the intensity that's necessary for growth and transformation, but not
Hmm.
so closed that it actually can't dance with the emergent complexity all around it, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
can't learn from the other systems that are around it, right?
That is the big question, and I agree with you. And I'm in the middle of exactly this question, as you can imagine, with Andrew having passed away, and I continue to work with the Sangha in Manifest Nirvana, and
Mm,
it's going well, and we create, when we come together, higher states.
mm,
That's not so difficult when you are trained, and when the Sangha knows each other and you have the tools to do that. But that's not all that wants to be what wants to be achieved. No, like it it then almost becomes a consumerism, like when people shouldn't just come to a place like this to
mm,
experience higher stage and be uplifted, which is beautiful, and it's a good thing in itself. But to be able to create something that goes really deep and it is transformational for people, it needs a different intensity,
hmm.
and that's a
Yes.
big question.
Yeah.
How is it with your students, the leadership students? Is that a similar process, or would you say that's a totally different approach?
I think it's similar. And I think that's actually been a learning for us and for me through this year, in that what we're doing with this leadership program is unusual. It's a kind of a hybrid thing. It's not exactly an academic program, but it's also not a spiritual retreat. It's somewhere in between. It's living in a
Hmm.
university,
Hmm.
but it's working towards transformation. And, so my approach in the beginning of this program was to mostly hold space in a loose way and allow each instructor, each presenter to create their own enclosure for their time, right? And let them set the conditions. And I tried to hold a kind of a loose space for that to happen and
Yeah.
trust each one to create because each one has their own way of working. I found that, and this is really through, feedback from the participants. They wanted the whole container to be held more tightly than I was doing it at the
Mm,
beginning. Uh,
interesting.
yeah, they really wanted more facilitation, more boundary setting, more clear enactment of a container than I was doing it more like this is a university program and you have this class and this class and this class, and you don't really try to enforce a transformative boundary around that, in a practice retreat-like sense. You let each
Hmm.
teacher do it. But we
Hmm.
discovered through this program you can't actually do that very well. You
Mm,
really need to you really need to hold the whole container, um, and then let each one do their own thing within that broader container that you're holding. So we've made a pivot towards that, and we'll be holding that more tightly going forward. Again, not rigidly, but with more I think, yeah, clearer boundaries around it that will allow for more of that ability for all the different elements to be held together in a way that can be, produce some pressure and also uh, have opportunity for transformation and change.
yeah, yeah. And there must be a big role also in the coming together of the students among themselves, or is it not, like
Yes,
the equivalent to a sangha where you support each other but you also challenge each other? I mean,
very much. Yeah, there's
that
a
that that must be a big part of it.
it is. I mean, I think everybody feels that they're discovering each other and what they're doing for each other, um, including, of course, moral support and inspiration, but also
Yeah,
self-challenging each other.
yeah,
That's been a really powerful part of the overall experience for them.
yeah, yeah. I in our sangha, Andrew also always taught like we have to be able to take three different roles. We have to be able to be a coach for somebody else. We have to be able to be coached or be challenged by somebody that has a little bit more experience, and you have the peer engagement. And it's very interesting when you think about it. These three different relationship styles have very different effects on your own development. Yeah,
Yes.
when you help somebody, when you are being helped, and when you are on peer level, that it's different qualities that are being developed, and I love that, and I think they are all necessary.
I think that's a really good point. And that's, I think for any group,
Yep.
to learn to navigate that is really important. In this particular group, I found that there are some people who do very well they're looking forward to engaging with the instructors and they like to receive that information. And then others are very resistant to receiving that information from instructors. They don't want to be um, taught. They want to only be
Mm,
involved
yeah,
in a
yeah,
process. And
yeah,
so there are different needs among the different participants.
yeah,
And how do you how do you hold that in a way that each one is met and yet each one is stretched a little bit too? Um,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, because it's a fine line between different needs and resistance to authority, or resistance to listening to somebody else. Or yeah, that's interesting. Speaking of students and education, what are your thoughts about education, like children education, when we talk about Third Attractor? Do you see anywhere that new kinds of educations are popping up or being experimented with? Or yeah, what's your thoughts about that?
um, yeah. I think uh, what well, I could mention. You probably know of one. Colleague, a common acquaintance in our circles of Brad Kirshner. Um, but if you
Yep.
don't know Brad very well, but he's very contemplatively informed, integrally informed, and is running an experimental school community that is really,
Mm,
I think, beautiful and amazing. What he's doing there
mm.
would be worth talking to him. Um,
No, I
so
don't know
that's
him personally. Yeah,
so that's something that's
that's interesting.
contemporary
Yeah,
that's happening right now that I'm aware of. That's promising to me. What he's doing with them
yeah.
is really beautiful. I don't, you probably know my story or don't know, but in my early 20s, I had been wanting to, for a while, become a monk. I thought that was going to be my path. And at first
Hmm.
it was Catholic, but I couldn't find the right nourishment in Catholicism. And I ended up discovering teachings in the East and was looking around. And
Yeah,
so I did that for a while. But one of the things that eventually attracted me was Krishnamurti's vision that
yeah,
um, we don't really need more monasteries for adults. If we really want to powerfully transform the culture, we need schools for children that uh, help, from the beginning in the awakening of authentic intelligence, which is rooted in spiritual insight. And um, how do we create a school that allows for that and that allows for children to avoid the typical conditioning factors of
yeah.
society and remain sharply intelligent, living in inquiry, all of that. So that was his vision for his schools. And I worked for a year at one of them in India. And
In Rishi Valley?
oh, no, I did it in Rajghat near Varanasi.
Oh, yep, up
But
north.
yes,
Yep,
yeah, I know Rishi Valley, which is a beautiful place. And then yeah, then there's the one
yep.
in Rajghat, which is, I mean,
Ah, yep.
that was to me, a magical experience. I was
Mm,
right next to Kashi Vishwanath Temple, which is where um, this pillar of light came down historically, representing Shiva. And I could walk out just like, like 100 yards outside of the grounds and get on a road which was the same road that the Buddha walked to Sarnath. So I could get on there and walk from my cabin all the way over to Sarnath and uh, where he gave his first teaching. And
Mhm.
so just a beautiful sacred place, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but for that uh, ex anyway, that environment was really focused on that, and it was quite inspiring for me. Those are still, you know, going on. I haven't been back to a Krishnamurti school in a while, and I don't know if they still have the same life that they did back in the 90s. I'm fearful a bit of them becoming kind of closed and encrusted the same way the Theosophical Society kind of became. Um, and I hope not, right? Or that they become watered down where they're just a progressive school, but they don't touch into the spiritual depth.
No, no, I don't think they are watered down. The daughter of one of a good friend of ours goes into this school in Rishi Valley, and from what I understand, it's a very tough school,
Mm.
but good, yeah. But that really teaches values, and especially spiritual values.
I think that's probably true in Rajghat too, where I went. I did go visit the Ojai school, California Krishnamurti school, about 2 years ago,
Hmm.
and I listened to some talks given there in which it sounded like a typical Protestant sermon where you look back at some words that somebody said and then you offer your own interpretation. I think he might have meant that, but I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah,
It was
yeah,
like, oh, what's going on
yeah,
here? Right.
yeah, 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 yeah. But what do you think would be the most important ingredients to you touched a little bit upon it, but it would be interesting to go a little bit deeper. What is it what we want to teach children so that they can actually live a different life
One of
and
the
co-create?
co-create, I went on a walk. I don't know if I told you this one before, but I went on a walk around Arunachala with Professor P. Krishna, who was the rector for the Rajghat School. And
Oh,
we went down for a conference at the, Ramanashram and
yeah,
spent a week there. And we would go take walks around Arunachala together. And one of the things that we both talked about, and he really emphasized, was a very, very simple frame, which it could be a surface level thing, but if you really go into it, it actually goes all the way down to deep spiritual ground, which is simple phrase of living in learning, living in the mode of
yeah,
learning, which
yeah,
is allowing yourself to be instructed by reality in an
yeah,
ongoing way that doesn't move away from truth, that doesn't move, that is not settling on comforting things or whatever, but that actually can keep fresh to what's
yeah,
emerging and what kind of practices are needed both individually and collectively institutionally that we stay fresh in that way that we can that we can root in being and allow for becoming in an ongoing generative fashion. And for him, the simple phrase for that was living and learning, living in that mode of learning, um,
yeah,
and being in dialogue with reality and the depth of reality. And so uh, it meant, a certain kind of epistemological humility that everybody within the school was, they both could speak from their own vision and truth and always be ready to, you know, learn and listen and respond
yeah,
to what's emerging in the field, right? Um, and so that's what he was trying to create was conditions for that at that school. And I taught one class there, which I've talked about in other videos, called culture class. And that's
mm,
a traditional class that they have in some of the Krishnamurti schools. And culture class functions in a couple levels, but one of the things that you do in it is you ask the students, to attend to trends in culture and what they're noticing and what are, the polarizations, what are the conditioning factors, what are all these kind of things, what are people, yeah, polarizing around or holding to or fixating on. And then you take it down and you try to look for those same dynamics playing out in the school and in the classroom and try to cultivate, curious and inquisitive intelligence among the students to be aware of how perception is conditioned continually by
Oh,
different
yeah,
kinds
yeah.
of influences. And the more that we're unconscious of those things, the more that we are subject to them. And therefore, so it's a only usually given in high school when the students have enough, critical faculty to be able to do that kind of reflection. But that's, to me, a key piece of what they were trying to do there.
Oh, that sounds beautiful. Yeah, yeah. Great. Probably a last question. Do you have a positive outlook towards the future, or what is your sense for where we are going and what is going to happen? Are you basically positive, or where are your doubts and where are your hopes?
Um, I'm positive um, that islands of coherence will persevere and hopefully in the long term have good impact. I'm right these days less sure that we're going to make it in the short term.
Mm,
Um, I think there's some real disruption likely to happen, whether it's through collapse or authoritarianism. I mean, I think those things are more likely than not right now. And
yeah,
the way that trends are going in the US, I never imagined that we would be looking at the conditions that are actually in play right now.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and so that kind of has shaken me. I always thought, oh, that's a possibility in another country, but it's not going to happen. And to see how
yeah,
easily it's actually happening here, it's like, oh, all right, Um, so I think I have to keep a positive orientation in order to keep working on the things that I care about. Um, but also kind of the orientation is I might be working for a future that I won't yet see. I might never see. Um,
yeah,
it might be later. It might come after. But if there can be something that's done towards that, um,
yeah, yeah,
that's enough.
yeah. I think that that's kind of in all my conversations, that was kind of the bottom line, that we feel like it probably gets much worse before it can get better, but let's do everything to prepare the ground for almost for the altar. And I don't know if you read Said Dablabani's book, and he goes exactly in that direction, that he says
Mm.
we probably just have to prepare ourselves so that we are ready to rebuild after whatever is going to happen in the next years.
Is that his second Sapiens book?
Yes, yeah,
I've been wanting to read that. I haven't read it yet, but I
yeah.
will.
It's very worth reading. It's good.
I used to follow, not very closely, but to some degree, the work of Michael Dowd,
Yes,
is,
yeah.
and then he made
He
that
became a
turn.
doomer, or no?
Yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. He became a doomer and then post-doom,
Yes,
um,
exactly.
but he got there maybe ahead of some of the others of us,
Yes, yes,
in seeing the writing on the wall, right? So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. He did. He really did.
mm,
Now he doesn't have to suffer through it.
I know it, right? It's tragic what happened with him. It's just such a strange life, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. It really is. Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to cover that we have not touched upon? And otherwise, I think we're good.
Um, I mean, it may be too much, and maybe I can learn about it more in other contexts. But if you could say anything, what are you doing at Manifest Nirvana to move towards the third attractor?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's it's two very distinct things that we are doing right now. We are doing I would say the waking up, the awakening pathway that I try to keep alive, and especially also the intersubjective non-duality work that we are doing, because these we space work is really valuable and helps us all to stay awake in a way. So we are doing that, and we plan a meditation and conversation retreat here in my place in memory of Andrew, but also because we want to come together. We are still a small sangha that has stayed together, and then we do now the third attractor work, where it's almost like the cultural side. It's like the consciousness and culture, which was always Andrew's term. We need to develop consciousness and culture. And the third attractor for me, even though it's a 4-quadrant thing, but it's more the cultural side. And we will have, after the meditation retreat, we will have a 5-day third attractor retreat here also, with only probably 15 people, where we want to go based on these conversations and everything that we can put together. Just want to see where we get together. I have no idea what exactly we will do. It's more like the inspiration that we want to find out what are the next steps. And it's beautiful. Like, I mean, today it's 6 months since Andrew passed away. And a lot of creativity has come through in the midst of all the grief, and that's very encouraging to just continue and actually manifesting nirvana. Like manifest nirvana is actually creating the third attractor.
Yeah.
And for me, it's still evolutionary enlightenment. That the philosophy itself, like the awakening to becoming and the evolutionary impulse, and be connected to that. For me personally, this is the only attractor I need right now, and everything else then comes from that. And I mean, you also live that life where you follow your inspirations and your callings, and that's the best third attractor, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And we're actually with the Blue Sky program, we're really, we're drawing from. It's really interesting what's happening. I've kind of got a new relationship with Brian Swim, and he's one of the people who presents early in the program, and we're talking about cosmogenetic identity,
Yeah,
which is that real shift towards, becoming identified with the evolutionary
yeah,
becoming of the universe.
yeah,
And
exactly.
so the whole program is framed in that. But what's really interesting
Oh,
is he has himself kind of discovered in himself that desire for, he's been mapping it and describing the outside story for so long, but now he's really feeling that call
oh,
towards
that's beautiful.
bringing it home in identity for himself, but for other people, and what he's calling, temples of cosmogenetic identity might be cropping up. So that's
Oh,
a
wow.
real emergence that's happening. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, but that's so good to hear, because I do think that there is a key in there, that more people awake to this becoming part of awakening, because that's
Mm.
what you are describing. It's the
Yes.
awakening to the cosmos, and Andrew called it the process perspective, when we awaken to the fact that there is only one process moving
Mm.
forward, and it's us.
Mm.
We are part and parcel of it, and the responsibility that this invokes, and the beauty, and the excitement and the
Mm.
inspiration. It's all one package when you actually awaken to it.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
beautifully put.
Thank you so much, Bruce. That was wonderful.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, really enjoyed talking with you, and it's a wonderful series you have going. So good luck with it.
Thank you.